A covert plan to kidnap St.Bhindranwale. That India Today exclusive is our top focus on our show tonight.
Operation Blue Star to flush terrorists out of the Golden Temple. But this could never have happened. Months before Operation Blue Star, a top secret operation was in the works. 200 commandos trained for it in a covert plan to abduct terror mastermind St.Bhindranwale.
Tonight on Center Stage, we tell you the untold story of Operation Sundown. We reveal how 200 special group commandos rehearsed on a mock-up two-story rest house in Uttar Pradesh. We tell you how the operation to kidnap terrorist St.Bhindranwale was almost given an okay by Indira Gandhi, and we'll also talk about why she pulled back at the last moment. And then we'll debate, was Indira Gandhi wrong in picking the army and rejecting the RAW's covert Operation Sundown planned jointly with the SAS Special Commando Force from the United Kingdom? This has been spoken of in the last several weeks in the national media. Nobody's been able to pin down the exact details of Operation Sundown. So from the classified files tonight, we will put the truth out before the nation. Let's get started. These are the stories that have taken center stage this evening. Complete shocker from the capital. 18-year-old Arunachal student beaten to death by a group of 7 to 8 men in South Delhi. Arvind Kejriwal takes on netas across the political spectrum. Rahul Gandhi finds place in the AAP sensational list of corrupt netas. NCP gives the Congress jitters. DP Tripathi praises Narendra Modi. Praful Patel says the party is losing its patience with the Congress. Janata Dal United unveils its federal front plan, says it's in talks with the Samajwadi Party and the BJD to form an alternative front. It's a Headlines Today exclusive. Delhi Chief Minister alleges blackmail as power supply firms warn of all-day cuts. The power regulator adds to AAP's woes, hikes tariffs substantially. And Team India's humiliation is complete. Men in blue suffer a series defeat against the Kiwis. It's a complete blackwash. In 1984, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had not one but two options on how to tackle the Punjab problem. She chose Operation Blue Star to neutralize St.Bhindranwale, the most militant Sikh secessionist leader. And in doing so, she set off a chain of events that would alienate the entire Sikh community and ultimately lead to her own assassination. But before that, in April 1984, 2 months before Blue Star, Indira Gandhi had the choice of choosing Operation Sundown, a covert operation to abduct Bhindranwale even before he entered the Golden Temple. Deputy Editor, India Today, Sandeep Punithanan, has the exclusive details which are being put out in the public domain for the first time ever.
In 1984, Punjab was in turmoil. Militancy had spread across the state. A radical group of Sikhs, led by a fiery religious preacher, St.Bhindranwale, had declared war against the state. His group had already murdered over 100 civilians and security personnel. At that time, Bhindranwale, surrounded by heavily armed supporters, operated out of a guest house near the Golden Temple. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had been exploring every option to end St.Bhindranwale's influence on Punjab. And 2 months before Blue Star happened, she had to decide on a top secret covert operation.
Operation Sundown. That was the name given to the covert mission to abduct St.Bhindranwale from the Guru Nanak Niwas, the building you see here behind me. Commandos from the special group of the RNAW practiced for months on a replica of this building that they had constructed in their base in Sarsawa, Uttar Pradesh.
It didn't get to play out, but this is how the operation before Blue Star was actually structured. The whole point was that commandos would rope down from specially configured Mi-4 helicopters. They would straddle down onto the roof of the Guru Nanak Niwas from that modified helicopter. That was step one of this entire procedure. In tandem, and part of step two would be commandos moving towards Bhindranwale's living quarters on the top floor via these armored vehicles that would be dashing into this entire structure. And another unit of commandos would be rushing in again with vehicles in what was to be a concerted move. After this, they would extract Bhindranwale and get out of the Golden Temple structure as quickly as possible. This was the secret plan before Operation Blue Star.
Special group operatives had earlier infiltrated the Golden Temple disguised as pilgrims and journalists to study its layout. Then for several weeks, over 200 SG commandos had rehearsed the operation on a mock-up of the two-storied rest house at Sarsawa in UP. Now all that was needed was the Prime Minister's nod to action the plan.
On being presented the plan, Indira Gandhi had just one question for the planners. How many casualties? 20% of the attacking force and 2 helicopters, she was told. Indira Gandhi wanted to know how many casualties, how many civilian casualties would take place if sundown were to be carried out. The planners had no answer. Mrs. Gandhi rejected sundown. She cleared Operation Blue Star, little knowing that 83 army personnel and over 400 civilians would die. For headlines today, this is Sandeep Unithan.
Operation Sundown was to be executed by commandos of the special group that functioned under the Research and Analysis Wing, which in turn reported directly to the Prime Minister. The SG had been modelled on the elite SAS commandos of Britain. No wonder then that the SAS was directly involved in the covert operation that was planned to grab Bhindranwale. A lot has been said about the involvement of the SAS, which has been in the headlines for the last few weeks, but no one quite knows what exactly the involvement of the SAS was. Sandeep Unithan has scooped the exclusive details.
Official letters declassified in the UK in January 2014 mention how an officer from Britain's elite commando unit, the Special Air Services, was sent to India. Till now, the supposition had been that the SAS only helped with Operation Blue Star, but now it seems that the SAS had been involved with the aborted Operation Sundown. In February 1984, an SAS officer visited the Golden Temple at the request of Indira Gandhi and her advisor R.N. Kao. It was this British officer who drew up the final plan on how to capture Bhindranwale. This was the plan that the Indian commandos would have executed if given the go-ahead. The commandos of the special group were housed at the Sarsawa Indian Air Force Base near Saharanpur in Uttar Pradesh and had trained for Operation Sundown. Though Sundown was aborted, some of the special group commandos who had trained for it spearheaded a near-suicidal frontal assault on the heavily fortified Akal Takht during Blue Star. The commandos stayed till the last militant was flushed out of the temple 3 days later.
गोल्डन टेम्पल के हमला करने से पहले 1 लाख बार नहीं 1 करोड़ बार सोचते किसी धर्म पे हम नुकसान कर रहे हैं, कितनी लाखों गोलियों के निशान है। मैं डेली आता हूँ, 30 साल से यहाँ पर आ रहा हूँ, मेरे को दुख होता है जब हम पानी की धुलाई करते हैं। टेको तक अंदर उतार दिया हरमंदिर साहब के बीच में धार्मिक स्थल के ऊपर। ये नहीं ना चाहिए, टंका का हमला जो है बहुत माड़ी बात है। टंका का हमला करके तो इसको डालने की कोशिश की, जो कि बहुत निंदनीय बात है।
Mrs. Gandhi rejected Operation Sundown because she feared civilian casualties. In June 1984, she sent the Indian Army into the temple for Operation Blue Star. Over 500 civilians died. Ironically, some of the commandos who were trained for Sundown were sent into the temple for Blue Star. It was a mission they hadn't trained for. With camera person Amit Kumar, this is Sandeep Unithan in Amritsar 4 headlines today.
Did former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi make a big mistake by choosing the bloody Operation Blue Star over the covert Operation Sundown? That's the center stage face-off for tonight, and joining us on this program are experts who've studied this very, very closely. I want to begin by introducing Mandeep Singh Bajwa, military historian, joining us from Chandigarh. Welcome, sir. Also with us on this program is the Lochan Singh, senior leader now of the Akali Dal. He's been involved in Operation Blue Star on the back lines for quite some time. Also with us at this time, Ambassador Hardeep Puri. Welcome, sir. We've got Jaidev Ranade, former additional secretary of the Research and Analysis Wing. General G.D. Bakshi joins us for an army perspective, because the army was pilloried later for having let the situation go completely out of control. Could things have been different if Indira Gandhi had picked Sundown? Also Madhu Kishwar with us in the studio. We've also got my colleague Sandeep Punithan, who works with India Today magazine and has put the story together. I want to go across first to Mandeep Singh Bajwa. As a military historian who's looked very closely at this, could you begin by giving our viewers a context for why Indira Gandhi picked the bloody Operation Blue Star over the covert Operation Sundown? Naturally, a covert operation could possibly have been executed with far fewer casualties. If casualties is what she was worried about, sir, then Operation Blue Star turned out to be far more brutal than what could have emerged after Operation Sundown.
Well, you know, by the middle of 83, Punjab was in a hopeless state. I mean, there were killings every day, sometimes even going up to 70, 80. And Bhindranwale was running a state within a state. He was issuing orders and decrets to government officers, police officials, and the general public. So it was imperative for the government to do something. And the government have been working on 2 options. You know, there was a military option, as you said, in Operation Sundown, covert, sharp surgical strike to remove Bhindranwale from his headquarters, from the scene of operations, and thereafter, in his absence, you know, deal with the extremists led by him. That option was, you know, derailed because of certain factors, and then there was the other soft option for which you know, the faction within the Congress led by Mr. Rajiv Gandhi was plugging for, you know, to hold secret talks with Bhindranwale, and those carried on, and that's one of the reasons why Operation Sundown was, you know, put off. Because beginning January 84, the secret talks with Bhindranwale were on.
No, but Jaidev Ranade, this seems to have been a major strategic and tactical mistake. Here was an opportunity worked out together by RAW, which you represented earlier, and the SAS commandos from Britain, which could have been far less bloody than what Blue Star ultimately turned out to be. You're sending the army in when you had a covert operation possibility lined up. Do you think this was a big mistake, sir?
Well, at least using the intelligence agencies and their special forces would have delivered a far less sharp and less blunt message, a more effective way of neutralizing the threat which had been allowed to develop. Using the army was a very blunt way of delivering a message, and I think casualties, neither the intelligence agencies nor the army could realistically have given an estimate of how things would pan out. But certainly, had the special forces been utilized, the special group been utilized, I think they would have found some ways of doing it, not necessarily entering the Golden Temple, maybe some other method by which they could have diffused the threat.
Ambassador Puri, it baffles me why Indira Gandhi would pick Blue Star over a covert operation, which could have been, and if casualties were her concern, as Sandeep reports that she asked Mr. Rao, who was in charge of research analysis at that time, how many casualties might there be? He said, I don't know, but anyone can tell you that when you send the army in, the possibility of casualties is much more. Why do you think she picked this option, sir?
Blue Star was a policy-induced disaster. We just don't know enough about the covert operation to know whether the estimation of the likely civilian casualties was an accurate estimation or not. I have absolutely no doubt that when the senior management of the Indian Army presented Blue Star as an option, they would have also underestimated the potential physical damage and the kind of brutalization that they were going to cause. So I have no doubt that both are not good options. The crucial question, and one that is still not being answered, is why was the situation allowed to develop to a point where you have to choose between a covert operation and a large-scale brutal use of force, overwhelming use of force. The rise of militancy in Punjab was well known. The reasons for the growth of militancy could have been tackled, but the fact is that the reigning political dispensation of the day chose to encourage this hydra-headed monster and use that for political purposes.
But that was in the past.
Well,
now we're talking about the period where a decision is being taken to take down Bhindranwale. You've got a plan to kidnap him.
All right, let me be
then you got a plan of sending in your army. Why would you pick the army or the special forces?
Rahul, the fact of the matter is that Operation Sundown, or whatever it was to be called, was aborted, or rather it was not pursued. Now there must have been reasons for that. I mean, you kidnap a leader of a militant movement. We've seen it in Sri Lanka, we've seen it elsewhere in the world. What do you do then? Unless you tackle the causes of the militancy and unless you are able to bring about a political solution which accompanies the action, you're going to have chaos. And what we have witnessed in Punjab was, I believe, a process which was not thought through. So I'm afraid choosing between the devil and the deep sea, why we chose, why the political dispensation chose Blue Star over an operation on which the full facts are not known, there must have been reasons. But then we should not place ourselves in the situation of evaluating two. We know one was a disaster, policy-induced disaster, which was Blue Star. About the rest, my friend Ranade Jaidev, with whom I had the privilege of going to university, we are very close friends. It is natural for representatives of agencies, intelligence agencies, always to say that their kind of operation, their kind of special forces, and something more clinical, something more surgical, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. But I'm also amazed that the political dispensation of the day chose to invite the SAS for technical assistance. This in and of itself shows that it is a very significant step that this kind of an option was considered. Now, maybe those who were responsible for the management of the RNAW at that point of time, some of them are very much around, intellectually active. You should invite them to... We did.
I must make that disclosure to our viewers that those raw officers who were involved in this operation were spoken to by me personally and our team through the day-to-day. For one reason or the other, they chose not to come. We also invited R.K. Dhawan, a former advisor, worked very closely with Indira Gandhi to this program. He refused to come. We invited spokespersons from the Congress party to come. Now that these details are being put out by India Today magazine for the first time, we wanted someone from the Congress to come and explain the context, but they chose to not participate in this program, leaving the question, Sandeep, why would Indira Gandhi pick a military operation with the brutality that the army involves over a covert operation? You've researched this story. What's your best guess?
Rahul, what I was told is that Indira Gandhi, towards the final months before Blue Star, she was almost consumed by a desire to avoid civilian casualties and reduce collateral. And let's not forget, you're talking just 13 years after the Bangladesh war, the Indian army, it was really, its stock was at its highest. And when you have the army chief walking into her office and assuring the Prime Minister repeatedly that there wouldn't be any civilian casualties, what option is left before the Prime Minister? If the weapon of last resort keeps assuring her this, that the Indian Army, an institution like the Army, assures her that there will be minimal collateral and casualties. And to my mind, the Indian Army grossly underestimated the opposition and overestimated its strength.
You're saying that the army misled the Prime Minister by saying that the casualties would be lesser. And naturally, Madhukishwar, if you're willing to give the Prime Minister the benefit of the doubt, if the then Army Chief and the Northern Army Commander tells you we can do this with minimal casualties, is it fair to say that that's the right decision the Prime Minister of the time took?
I think there's enough today known and written about this whole tragic phase of Punjab and Indian history to try being so generous. I don't think we need to be so generous towards Indira Gandhi. I don't think she deserves benefit of doubt for the simple reason. I want to make 3 quick points. One, Operation Black Thunder that KPS Gill led. It did not produce casualties, it was transparent, it was open, it achieved its purpose, and it destroyed the credibility and the romance around militancy. He did it with such surgical precision, carrying even media teams with him, national and international. By contrast, Operation Blue Star was a war against the people of Punjab. It wasn't just that the Golden Temple, the sacred seat of Sikhs, was attacked by the army with tanks, but also thousands of people actually faced the army. In many places it was literally army versus the people, the Sikhs of Punjab. It was declared war by the Congress party, Congress-led government in the centre. Thirdly, I think these choices that you are presenting today, whether a covert type raw operation or army invasion of Golden Temple, they have a background. Let's not forget Bhindranwale was propped up by the Congress party to undercut the Akali party, to grab hold of this entire Gurdwara network and to defeat Akalis in elections. That was the whole purpose, to undercut them. And because the Akalis had given her the toughest resistance during the emergency. Mind you, Punjab was one state where every single day under leadership of Longowal, jihadi jathas went to court arrest peacefully, chanting kirtan to protest against emergency. They gave her the toughest resistance. She wanted to destroy this. She wanted to destroy leaders like Longowal, moderate, peaceful, Gandhian type leaders, and she propped up Bhindranwale and allowed him to take charge of Golden Temple, passed resolutions on Khalistan. And I remember interviewing Longowal just a few days before his assassination, and he said, we asked Indira Gandhi, you letting him be there, he's promising Khalistan from the precincts of Golden Temple, and he says, हमने पूछा कांग्रेसियों से, गुरुद्वारे में कड़ा प्रसाद तो बांट सकते हो, आप खालिस्तान कैसे बांट सकते हो? How can you create Khalistan sitting in? The point is, all these slogans were raised with the active participation, covert support of the Congress party.
I want to go across to Talochan Singh. You've made some points. Talochan Singh is in the unique position of having been the media advisor to President Gyani Zail Singh at the time, and now currently is with the Akali Dal. So I don't know which turban, if I could say, that you're wearing tonight, but Mr. Talochan Singh, I want to understand from you the context behind the decision that was taken, and since you were in the thick of things at that time, what's your sense of why the then Prime Minister picked Operation Blue Star, sending the army in instead of a more covert operation, sir?
Rahul, I have listened to the very good views given by all the panelists. I am very much certain that every day if some new such things which are revealed even today by India Today, every Sikh is being now convinced that Indira Gandhi's motive was only a political motive. It was all to destroy the Sikh leadership, and she didn't agree when all the leaders led by Longowal came 5 times to her and Mr. Alexander for some good settlement. She every time assured them, and later she denied. So the whole politics, after all, it took more than 3 months that in Golden Temple, when Jathedar Bhindranwale was there, who was sending the arms? Why the armed trucks which were going to Golden Temple and police was waiting those to be crossed? Nobody checked those. The fear was that in one side, Bhindranwale was being supported by the Congress party, and the arms were smuggled in the Golden Temple, so that what was? Naturally, to come to a conclusion that someday government will say it has become an enemy center and we must destroy it. Both options which you have told today would have been disastrous. The total... No,
but you aren't answering. You're speaking in your capacity only as an Akali leader, but also in your capacity as the former media advisor to the then Congress president. I want to understand from you why you think Indira Gandhi picked the military option over the covert option, sir.
You see, this shows her mind was where? Her mind was not of the solution of the problem. Her mind was that after Bangladesh war, she should do some more act to show her that she is very strong and she wanted to gain politically. After all, I was with the Gyani Zail Singh ji, Rashtrapati of the country. She did not consult Rashtrapati even once for Blue Star. Even 4 days before Blue Star, she assured Gyani ji that nothing will happen. I am just going and creating a terror that the terrorists should come out. She never tried for any peaceful solution even once. All Akali leaders, Longowal, Sardar Prakash Singh Badal, have been waiting in Delhi for days long, but Indira Gandhi never agreed and never gave them power or gave them such a, plan so that they could diffuse the situation. In a way, they tried that there should be more conflict between Bhindranwale and Longowal. Certain agents of Congress were working there for this very purpose. So what I feel, she had a grudge against the Sikhs because the Akali party led a morcha during emergency. The day she became Prime Minister in January 80, she removed Akali government, and whereas Bhajanlal, who was the Chief Minister of Janata Dal, she accepted him and made a Congress government.
Okay, one of the points that's been made by Madhu Kishwar is that the army misled the Prime Minister by telling her, and that's the point that Sandeep also
I didn't make that.
I said there was
it's a political choice.
The political choice, and there was
She made a political choice. What do you mean? How can the army, in India, the army doesn't call the shots? This was a political decision, and she was playing Durga. I think she had gotten to
But the army also made a present. Yes, Ambassador.
No, the issue is the army is a professional outfit. The army is given terms of reference for an operation. Then they go to the drawing board. Then they come back with a plan. And that plan can backfire in terms of underestimation, in terms of other collateral damage. But it is for the political leadership to take the call.
Sure. No, but I want to get in the military perspective.
Had opposed it. Mind you, General Sinha had opposed it. He was removed, and then General Vaidya and General Sundarji brought in. So it's not as if within the army
that there was unanimity.
Were dissenting voices. But she chose not to heed wise counsel of General Sinha. She chose to play Rambo.
But Rahul, I have a more basic point. Yes. It does not require too much of knowledge of military logistics to know that if you are dealing with a situation which has the physical characteristics of the Golden Temple, when there are people in there, that they've had stuff coming in. You know, the saying then was, don't stop this truck, a Santada Mala. You know, when you had that kind of a situation, arms coming in, it was very well known, it was being reported. So you know that a build-up has taken place. So what is this? Is this an intelligence failure to know the extent to which the build-up is taken place? More, when you decide to use artillery, tanks against a holy shrine which is full of people, what else do you expect?
Okay, so, I want to get into military perspective. General G.D. Bakshi is joining us. The army being criticized, for ultimately going ahead with what proved to be a fatally wrong operation, fatally flawed operation, especially given the fact that there were so many civilian and military casualties, when you had an option which now emerges, which was a covert operation which could have been carried out with far fewer civilian casualties. Do you think the general... We don't know that. Allow me to ask the question.
This is also covert and evil.
We can't have a debate only from one perspective. Allow me to ask another question as well. General G.D. Bakshi, do you think the military leadership of the time ill-advised Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and got her to take the option which proved to be a far more bloody option? General Bakshi.
Look, it was one of the most tragic operations that this army has had to do. We pray to God we never have to do it again. Now what I would like to point out as a military historian is this talk of a special operation is moonshine. Given the degree of military kind of a build-up that had taken place inside, it was beyond the feasibility of any special operations force. As history tells us, even a brigade of infantry had severe problems trying to do this. So the same set of commandos that you are talking of were part of Operation Blue Star. They had given their, their inputs. So it was not that the initial thinking was to commence.
But General Bakshi, there is a big difference. There is a big difference between sending your tanks rolling into the premises of the Golden Temple and in sending in people in the middle of the night, paradropping them from helicopters.
But what about KPS Gill's Operation Black Thunder? Why aren't we discussing that?
One by one.
It was a very sophisticated operation.
One by one. One by one.
Presenting us bad choices.
Get in a word.
Yes, General Bakshi, go on.
You see, I am talking purely from the point of view of military operational feasibility. The special operation was analyzed and not found suitable. Even at the start of Operation Blue Star, if you go into the details, the plan was still to try and start with a covert operation. I'm sorry.
How are you coming to the conclusion that the operation was found unfeasible? The then Research and Analysis Wing Chief says he could have pulled it off. There's a full operation that's been planned out, Mr. Ranade. Rameshwar Nathka, one of the foremost intelligence salutes in the country, is confident he can pull this off along with the special group. We don't know if that would have been a failure, and surely when you're coming in the middle of the night, you have the advantage of catching the enemy off guard.
That group was part of the attacking force.
We were coming to it one by one. One by one. Let Mr. Ranade respond. Let Mr. Ranade respond. Madhu also wants to get a word in. Mr. Ranade.
Precisely. I think you described Mr. Cow very well as a professional sleuth and leader of an organization. He was also honest enough to say that he cannot guarantee that there will be no casualties. And no one, I think, can guarantee that there will be no casualties. But what this operation would have assured is a method of trying to resolve the problem without a frontal kind of assault. And I think that is what, at that point in time, people were looking for. I'm not going into the politics of it as to how the situation was allowed to develop. But once it had developed, they would have envisioned different kinds of scenarios through which to neutralize the problem.
But I fundamentally disagree with what General Bakshi is saying. How is it that when you send your tanks in a very visible fashion, how can the level of casualty compare with that of a covert operation? Ambassador Puri, do you want to respond to that?
What General
Bakshi is saying?
Yes, General Bakshi is someone I follow with great interest. I respect him. I'm only worried about one tendency which I'm seeing. Here, Blue Star was a botched up military operation. There was overwhelming use of force. You used artillery against civilians who were inside. You underestimated the kind of firepower they have. Why are we placing ourselves in the situation of saying that the other operation was considered and found not suitable?
Now, how do you come to that conclusion? How did you come to that conclusion, General Bakshi?
Let those who were
What military history do you know which no one else is aware of?
Look, let me give you some of the facts. The fact is that initially even the army, when it wanted to go in the form of a covert operation. There were para-commandos who were supposed to come in, swim in via the tank. I'm sorry, it didn't work. None of this, because given the degree of opposition, what we called relative strength, it did work. It was a botched up operation. Of course it was a botched up operation.
It was a
tragic operation. Damn it. It was the worst that we have had to do in our history. We just obeyed our orders.
Exactly.
That is
the issue. You obeyed orders. It could not have been the brainchild of even the most idiotic soldier in the Indian army. It was a political choice.
You don't know a thing about soldiering. My dear madam, you don't know a thing about soldiering. So I suppose you can keep your sarcasm to yourself.
Are you saying it was an army brainchild? I'm saying it was a political choice. And please don't take credit
what it was ordered to
for a politically disastrous choice. Please don't take credit for a politically disastrous choice. I'm saying the army could not have. The Indian army
we are the sorry guys who have to execute and carry out such unwelcome operations. At the end of the day, I'm sorry, we have to obey our orders.
Ambassador Puri wants to respond. One by one, allow me to moderate this debate. Ambassador Puri wants to respond.
I heard General Bakshi say and very clearly that this was one of the most unfortunate operations that the Indian Army was called on to take. I totally agree with that. He also said that they were politically instructed to carry out this operation like this. I think let's accept what he says and then say, well, let us realize that these were political instructions to storm.
No, but there are 2 points. There are 2 points. Mandeep Bajwa, there are 2 points that General Bakshi has said. A, that the covert operation was considered but rejected. Is there any history which is out in the public domain, any facts which prove this? Because to my mind, the covert operation has the possibility of being carried out with far fewer casualties than when you send the tanks rolling into the Golden Temple, Mandeep Bajwa.
Well, covert operation, as you said, was thought of. I mean, right through 83 until the beginning of 84, they not only were planning for it, an SAS officer came and vetted their plan, and rehearsals were also carried out. I think, the fact that the special group and the other planners could not rule out collateral damage in the form of civilian casualties was what precluded.
But neither did the army rule out the possibility of civilian casualties and collateral damage. In fact, Sandeep, it's only logical for any student of military history to know that when you send the tanks in anywhere, the collateral damage will be much more than when you send Parak.
Rahul, I just want to comment on what General Bakshi said about the commandos being used. Do you know that of the 80 odd Indian Army soldiers that died that night, something like 1/3 of them were the commandos. Sure. They were rushed in as suicide infantry.
That's
the commandos that I spoke to were rushed in as suicide infantry because they were asked to do impossible tasks, and they said, look, we are not trained for this. We are specially trained thing. Give us an option of doing a commando operation. They said, no, you have to go in, you have to do these frontal assaults against bunkers, and with the result that in a couple of hours you had 25 of the most highly trained soldiers dropping dead. The bodies were catching fire on the parikrama because they were under such a repeated fire. And then the army realized that there was something wrong. I mean, it was a catastrophic intelligence failure. It was a catastrophic intelligence failure. The army had no idea about the kind of weaponry that was inside. And when they actually saw RPGs being fired from inside the Akal Takht, that's when they sent in the tanks. Because, the army cannot fail. That's what they say. It's a weapon of last resort. So then that's when they started firing tanks.
Okay, one by one. General Bakshi wants to respond. General Bakshi, I don't understand your logic of suggesting that a brutal army operation can be less catastrophic than a covert operation. It baffles me. I don't understand your logic at all, sir.
Operations are launched on the basis of their degree of success that you feel you can achieve. We tried to get Prabhakaran. Do you understand what happened to that special operation? All of them were shut up. Those poor Sikh-allied boys were, in the middle of a death trap. So therefore it is easy to talk in theoretical terms when the degree of opposition inside that highly sensitive target, which was protected by the emotions of a very martial community in this country, which forms such a large component of our own army, it was tragic. It was a Hobson's choice, and the tanks had not been planned for. The only thing was that the worry, the panic then set in was that before the morning, that thing had to be clear, otherwise more civilians would have come in towards the temple. That was the time, it was a panic reaction. There is a lot that
one thing which seems very clear is that Major General Shahbaz Singh wanted to extend this operation to the morning. That is what he was trying to do.
That was the last resort.
Talochan saying, those who were in the defensive positions inside the Golden Temple and the Akal Takht wanted to extend the operation to the morning so that they believed that people from the neighboring areas and the villages would come rushing in. That's the strategy with which those who were held inside the Golden Temple were thinking.
That is totally wrong. What I said earlier, I want further to prove. Bhindranwale stayed for 2-3 months in the Guru Nanak Niwas. He was, if the military intelligence, what they are claiming today, they were aware he was there. But he moved to Akal Takht. Government of India was waiting for it, that he should go there. Secondly, when this operation took place, that was a very religious day. The martyrdom of Guru Arjan Dev. Thousands of Sikh pilgrims were inside, and on that day this attack was done. That I want to prove. This was a political decision. Indira Gandhi wanted to teach the Sikhs a lesson, and there is
That's
the
it.
intelligence
That is the real point. That is the real point.
Mandeep Bajwa, I want your professional sense of whether that was the real reason and that Indira Gandhi wanted to teach the Sikh community a lesson, and this comes at a time when Rahul Gandhi is spoken about the involvement of congressmen in the riots that followed Mrs. Gandhi's assassination. Sikh sentiments are already inflamed, and now these charges being made that because you wanted to teach the Sikhs a lesson, therefore you picked the more violent option over the more covert operation. Mandeep Bajwa, final comments.
I must disagree with Mr. Trilokin Singh. I think the government did explore all options. There were secret talks held with Bhindranwale, but then things went even beyond his own control. I mean, extremists within his own camp were organizing murders and killings, and the situation had become so bad that the government had to act. Something had to be done. I don't think this was in any way any sort of attack on the Sikh community.
Madhu Kishore, are you being really unfair to Mrs. Gandhi when you suggest that this was deliberate to try and extract as much bloodshed as possible? Surely no Prime Minister would want to do that.
No, it's not to do with whether she wanted to do it or she didn't want to do it. Neither you or I can definitely speak.
But that's the charge 11.
No, but I'm saying, what do the actions speak of? What do they tell us? It's not as if it all happened all of a sudden. It was not like Pakistani invasion that she wasn't really prepared for. This was a build-up over years. Bhindranwale was a plant, and it was a Congress plant. Everybody in Punjab used to call her the third son of Mrs. Indira Gandhi. Even in those days, it was well known. Secondly, it was meant to teach the Akalis a lesson for having given her such a tough resistance during the emergency. Punjab history of that period needs to be understood and written, because not only the Akali farmers who were challenging the government's policies of not letting farmers send their wheat outside for sale, very draconian use of Essential Commodities Act, the manner in which the Akali farmers movement, the Bharatiya Kisan Union movement had been crushed. All that is the background history.
Mr. Ranade, can the Congress get away by saying
the point that no, but at one last
yes.
point. See, we must also look at, even if you were talking about a certain situation having built up, Mrs. Gandhi not having been prepared for it, the fact is that KPS Gill proved a couple of years later how well, with surgical precision, with the least damage, with total open transparency and public cooperation, such an operation could be carried out. He did it very well and very successfully. And that's what broke the back of terrorist politics and militancy
Mr. Ranade,
in Punjab.
can the Congress party legitimately claim that this was lack of intelligence which is responsible for the deaths that we saw? Because if information was available, and there's so many public accounts of books that we've read, that weapons were being sent into the Golden Temple, then surely people in the establishment knew what they were up against. The fact that there was a turncoat general planning strategy for Bhindranwale, all of this was known. So can the Congress party claim that this was an intelligence failure?
I think this was public knowledge at that point in time, that a lot of arms were being taken into the Golden Temple, that General Shabik Singh was there. I mean, it was not secret. I think the establishment would certainly have known, the government agencies would certainly have known. They may not have had full details about the passageways, etc., but that also they should have been able to find out. And that is precisely the point I was making, that had it been a covert operation, had intelligence agencies been involved, they would have taken their time and tried to get the details before
but all those details had been sought, Sandeep. They'd already, from what I understand, they'd already gone in as journalists, they'd gone in as pilgrims, they'd drawn long dadis, they were looking like Sikhs. They were ready to execute this operation.
There seemed to be a huge lack of communication between what RAW gathered, the intelligence that RAW gathered, and whether or not this was transmitted to the army. Because when the army went in, they went in absolutely, on the assumption that the militants would actually lay down their weapons and just run out of the temple. I mean, that is how they walked in.
How do you come to the conclusion that the militants would lay down their weapons? Because
it's the manner of speaking. I mean,
the army should have made it a point to educate themselves based on inputs from the the RNAW and other agencies.
Which clearly they didn't, because here was an outfit that was working there for many months, which had scoped out the place, which had
got
plans.
Is it once again General Bakshi a case?
Institutions,
Is it once again General Bakshi a case of the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing, the RAW having all this information about the exact layout, where the fortifications were available with them, and not sharing with them, with the army, General Bakshi?
Look, that invariably is the case. We have seen repetitions of that in Sri Lanka. When the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, our basic problem is coordination.
But surely the army should have had better intelligence of its own.
But LTTE was also propped up by the Congress party.
That's a different debate.
But
surely the military intelligence should have had information of their own, General Bakshi.
Towards the end, the tactical details were available. And when the tactical details told you the kind of opposition that you had there, almost a battalion minus with machine guns, with rocket launchers, with AKs, with grenade launchers, that was the time it became quite obvious that a covert operations, I'm afraid, militarily would not work.
Okay, you're making that point. I'm out of time. I want to listen to Ambassador Puri, because the point that's being made by General Bakshi, it's an important point. Given the level of fortifications and the sort of equipment available with Bhindranwale and gang, you couldn't have pulled off a covert operation. That's the point he's making.
Well, I think that's a valid point, and if that is correct, then you come to the assessment that in April, when you were looking at a covert operation, by that time it was too late. If that is indeed the case, that you had convinced yourself that the forces reigned inside the Golden Temple were of such a nature that you would have to use tanks, I'm afraid then the political decision should have been not to use the tanks. Because using heavy artillery against a religious shrine with thousands and thousands of pilgrims on that particular day, because it was a religious significance, it created a monumental public relations disaster as well.
But I still disagree with what General Bakshi is saying, because Mr. Ranade, if at all, Indira Gandhi and the powers that be at that time felt that maybe a covert operation might not have succeeded, you could have sent
caused less damage.
You could have sent in your paracommandos first and kept the army ready as standby. That's the most logical, the most basic way to go.
Look, why couldn't you cut off supplies?
No, you couldn't cut off supplies. It is argued. I'm not saying rightly so.
They're already stocked up.
They're stocked up, and there would have been anger in the villages around the Golden Temple.
But I want you to respond
to the point that I'm making.
Let's not forget that the military commander had assured her that it would be a cakewalk.
Exactly, that is the issue, that there will be minimal casualties. So it is a question of evaluating one option against the other. In the case of the covert operation, from what I can make out, the esteemed Mr. R.N. Kao said, I cannot guarantee that there will not be. So here is total humility on the one side.
Is it false bravado, General Bakshi, on the part of the generals who said to Indira Gandhi that we can do this with minimal damage? False bravado on the part of the generals, Bakshi?
In hindsight, I'm sorry to say, yes.
And that's it, man. That's it.
Okay, I'm out of time on this broadcast, but there are 2 points that emerge as clear as daylight. One, there's absolutely no rationale and logic behind sending tanks into the Golden Temple, even if that was the choice of the last resort. What could have been done could have been a mixture of a covert operation with the army there as standby, because you would have caught the enemy by surprise, and then if you'd been overwhelmed and overpowered by the enemy, you would have had the weapon of the last resort in standby. But then hindsight is always 20/20, and that's just the way.
But they didn't learn. They went and propped up LTTE.
It's a shocker from South Delhi's Lajpat Nagar area. A student from the northeast, Nido, Tanya, beaten to death mercilessly by as many as 8 men. Nido was the son of Arunachal Pradesh's